Welcome to my almost 20-year project, which is a 1996 GMC Sonoma that I have been building, rebuilding, redesigning for over a decade. I'm now at the point that I just want to get this done, and I'm doing what I can do just to get it on the road. Even though it's not going to be perfect, it'll allow me to figure out what I can change in the future and continuously build it for the next 20 years. What I'm going to be working on today is figuring out if my rear axle is centered. When I've done the work before, I had some frames of reference, but I'm starting to second guess how they are. I already know that side to side it is off. When I actually put the bed on, there's more gap to one side versus the other, so I know I have to move that, but I want to make sure front and back is correct. I think it is off maybe by a 1/4 inch, but that's not too big of a deal. But now my goal is, how do I center it? And how do I center it given the shape of the frame that's in, which I'll show you in a second. So here's a look at my frame. I had built this frame, which is basically from the firewall back, probably 10 years ago, actually maybe even longer, maybe 13 years ago. And at the time, look at the forums, everybody was using 1/4 inch steel, but it's really heavy. And I want this to be strong, but at the same time, I don't want it to be heavier than what I had before. So I'm actually planning on redesigning the back half of the frame as well as the rear suspension slightly. When I designed it, I made a bit of a mistake, and I think I'm going to get a lot of axle hop with the way it's set up. Going to make some slight changes there, but that's for a later time. Right now, I just want to be able to center the axle so I have a spot for it while I rebuild the frame around it. But since this frame is already here, I'm not sure if it's actually square as it runs longitudinally, that I think it actually starts to bow into itself. And I can't trust any of the other cross members that I have today. So my plan is to actually build temporary cross members around here at these marks. One over here, the second one back here. Get it centered, as best as I can, and then get a laser level that goes across the center of those two cross members, bringing it to the back, making sure that that is centered, so I know that side to side, I have it in the right spot. And then I'll find a way to lock it into place once I'm happy with it. Then I can move over to the frame. Here I'm cutting some square tubing to length to act as the temporary cross member. And I'm taking my time to make sure it is square with the frame in the locations that I want. Okay, so now that I have the two cross member pieces cut out, I had to do a little bit of sanding to make sure it fit and get it squared up with the frame. My next step is to tack it in so it doesn't move. As you would have seen just before, I nudged the one that's more towards the transmission and I had to readjust it. So I just want to make sure that I don't mistakenly move it again, so I don't have to do it a third time. Get it tacked in, and then I'm going to find the center of these two cross members. Okay, so what I've done is I put these two posts up, one over here and the other one over there in the center of the cross members that I welded up. I made sure they were squared up because as you weld, for those that haven't done it or are new to welding, when the weld shrinks, it'll actually pull the metal back. So even when I welded on both sides, I had to use a hammer just to persuade it to get into the center. I then lined up the laser to the center of both of the posts. And when it originally projected, actually in this cross member, it was really far off to the left here. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't straight, that's the reason why. But I decided to double check. And I measured to where the laser was projecting to this corner over here, and again on the other side to form that triangle and see what was coming out, and it was off. So I readjusted that, so then the laser is actually in the center when you measure from those two corners. I then did the same on the further back piece just to triple check, and got the same measurement when I go from here on the left to the center, and again from the right hand side to the center. Now looking at where it's projecting on the rear end, the longer line is what I believe is the center. I'm gonna have to do a little double check, triple check. And from the front, it's quite close. So I might actually be in a really good position that I don't have to move things around. Well, let me show you what I've done for the last hour, which isn't much in terms of progress, building anything, or getting something ready with a jig or what I've been doing to line up measurements. But I've been doing a lot of measuring to see if the rear axle is square or not. The short answer is I'm 90% sure it is square, which is great news. It's actually fantastic news because I was scratching my head of how I'd have to move it side to side to square things up. And again, I'm only 90%, there's still 10% doubt that I have, but I might be in the clear that I don't have to play around with that. So I did a couple of things to verify. One is now that I know that this post here is in the center, I can measure from there to one of the 4 bolts that the axle mounts onto the hub there. I did it on both sides and got the exact same measurement. So that was first the great news. However, it doesn't mean that the axle has moved out a bit and then also kicked out a bit, because you could create the same distance from that bolt to the center post and from that center post to the equivalent bolt on this side by just moving things over and out. So I needed to check things from an area that I think is square to the actual axle tubes. So the way I did that was I had some long 1x1 tubing and I laid it across the 2 cross members I put in, squared it up, and took a measurement from over here all the way back, since it runs underneath the axle tube itself, and just used a plumb bob to get everything lined up, and it was the exact same measurements on both sides. All right, I'm really excited here because now that I've measured everything and realized that my rear axle is in a fairly good position. Side to side, it's square. Front and back, it's square with the frame, just about an 1/8 inch back, so I can move that with adjustable 4 links, suspension. And lastly, I got it to the right height that I want. I'm aiming for about 5 inches off the ground, and I'm really close. Again, maybe a 1/16 off between left wheel and right wheel, and I'm just using wooden blocks. So again, some of that could be corrected as I go to fine tune and actually refabricate the rear suspension. So what I got to do now is make sure that when I start cutting away the frame, I don't lose any of the points that I have. So I'm going to be making up some bracing out of angle iron and welding it from the frame, the areas that I'm going to keep temporarily, to the frame table that I have. Once I've done that, I'll figure out the final design for the rear back half, get that fabbed up, and away you go. But first step is, let's get everything braced. So I got some bracing in just to make sure things don't move on me when I start cutting away. I think I need to do a little bit more in the back, but I ran out of angle iron that I need. Another thing I did, which I didn't show while I was making it, is this is the bed mount. And I've been using this oblong hole as a datum. And if I cut it away, I'm going to lose my datum as it relates to the center of the axle because of how I measured it to the bed itself. Again, Need to make sure it doesn't get too close to the cab because you want a little bit of a gap. Closer is cleaner, but you don't want it touching because when there's movement, it'll start rub off the paint, start to rust. I know I already have enough rust, I'm gonna get rid of most of it, but I don't want any rust to creep back once I get rid of it. So basically, as I squared it off as best as I can to the frame table, it doesn't have to be perfect. Had some rod that I purchased before, cut it down, did the same to the other side. I haven't cut that one down yet, but this way I have a way to keep that datum set. So even if I cut away from it, I'll have an opportunity to use that as a measurement, square it off to the one over here with the new frame. And then I know where to start from when I build the bed mounts in the future. Here, I'm making the axle level by placing some square tubing across the tires and raising the axle until the angle finder says 0 degrees. I then add some shims underneath the tires to make sure it stays level. Well, you just saw me go back, cut the braces that I had already put, and talked about after I was excited that everything was level. Overnight, I was thinking about it, came back the next day, checked some things in terms of the rear axle, and realized it was actually not straight. One side was higher than the other. I don't know what I missed, but either way I missed it, and it was a frustrating 2 hours because I was chasing my tail a bit where I thought I was actually getting it more level, and as I was adding shims underneath the tires, it was actually making it further away from where the datum that I was measuring off of, which was a 1-inch square bar that's on top of the frame in the cab area. So after 2 hours, finally figured it out, have everything quite level, at least as good as it needs to be, and just went back and re-welded the braces. I'm going to change things up a little bit so it gives me a bit more freedom so that I can take off that back section once I've redesigned it. Anyway, hopefully, I know that won't be the first or the last setback. I know there's going to be other setbacks, but hopefully there won't be many and not any setbacks in the near future. I'm going to end things off here. And I know I spent a lot of time measuring and figuring out how I'm going to measure the rear axle, and it probably didn't make for the most entertaining of videos. But I really want to share with you my train of thought as I embark to complete my 20-year project. In the next video, I'm thinking I'm going to share the design idea I have for the suspension and how I came up with that idea and how that influences the new rear frame that I'm building, and probably get into some of the fabrication of that new rear frame. I do want to thank everybody who sat through the video until the very end. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you will come back once I have the next video out.